Good morning. The meeting of the LSU Board of Supervisors will come to order. Mr. Drotti, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Damp.
Here.
Mr. Starnes.
Here.
Ms. Werner.
Here.
Mr. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Armentor.
Here.
Mr. Blossman.
Here.
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Cox.
Here.
Ms. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Mallett.
Here.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Mr. Morrow.
Here.
Mr. Temple.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Woods. Mr. Zuschlag.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, Supervisor Stone Cox will lead us in the invocation, and Hannah Barrios will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to be here safely today. This year has been a very difficult one through COVID, racial injustice, and now sexual violence. And I ask that we can just lift up the survivors of the sexual and domestic abuse, because today will not be an easy day for them, but it will be a necessary day for our community to move forward. And I ask that we can use this meeting and this time and this moment to reflect and to learn and to grow as a community so that we can better take care of our students. And it is in your name we pray. Amen.
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 Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank y'all.
No flag. Ms. Barrios. Where's Ms. Barrios? We already know plenty about Stone Cox, and we'd love for you to tell us just a little bit about yourself. I know you, obviously, and I'm sure everybody else would love to hear a little bit about you.
Well, thank y'all. So my name is Hannah Barrios. I'm a senior here. I'm studying English and political science, and I'm going to graduate in May, so 2 more months, so I'm getting really excited for that. I currently serve as student body vice president, so I get to serve alongside Stone. I know y'all know him. We ran last year in March, and we could not have expected everything that this year has given us, obviously. But we've been very blessed to serve in these positions and be given the responsibility to advocate for students and to serve them in this time. So we worked through COVID response. The day we got elected was the day that LSU closed. So it's been a ride for us, but we've really worked hard to advocate for students and to really carry out initiatives that we have planned for this year. So I'm really honored to serve as vice president. I also am a member of Untitled sorority and an LSU ambassador. So I've been involved in different areas of campus since I've been here. And yeah, I'm very thankful to be here with y'all today.
Ms. Barrios, thank you very much. You have given a lot to this university, and we are deeply appreciative for your service, and we thank you for that.
Mr. Chairman, she didn't mention, but she's also serving on the presidential search team.
I did know that, and yes, so that's very time consuming, and you have to put up with Mr. Williams and other members of the board, and so we are deeply appreciative. Thank you for your service. Thank you. Today we have one person signed up for public comment. Mr. Drotti, can you identify that person, please?
Yes, sir. We have Carolyn Schroeder, who will provide comment via Zoom.
Okay, can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. As mentioned, my name is Carolyn Schroeder. I graduated from LSU in May of 2020. And during my time as a student, I had personal experience with the Title IX office, and I'd like to make 2 things very clear before this report is released. First, I'd like to express my support and gratitude for a number of individuals at LSU, because I know that today, like the last few months, a lot of people are going to be blamed for a lot of different things. Many of them will deserve it, and I know I certainly blame a lot of different people at every level of the university for this mess. However, I sincerely believe that President Tom Galligan, who is still very new to his position, is doing his best to manage a difficult situation that he inherited but did not necessarily create. And I believe that the employees at Lighthouse, LSU's Survivor Outreach Program, are in danger of not receiving the credit that they deserve today. Every day they go to work at one of the most emotionally challenging jobs imaginable, and they go above and beyond without thanks or appreciation to provide students with the support that they need. Second, I'd like to express how little faith I have in this board to do the right thing today or in the months to come. Today, we're not here. This meeting was not called out of the goodness of your heart. We're here because a national newspaper published a story in November of last year, which created a bit of a public relations problem for you. That is the only reason you are here now, pretending to resolve this issue. Prior to that article, there were dozens of lawsuits against LSU about this issue, of which you were no doubt aware, yet prior to that article, you did nothing but enable the continuation of this abuse. You hired a known domestic abuser as head football coach, yet today you will pretend to be shocked and appalled that he covered up his players' sexual misconduct. Just last week, you quickly and quietly handed an $800 million energy contract to a man who is the legal guardian of an LSU athlete charged with the domestic abuse and who is named in several police reports. Yet you will pretend today that you had no idea he would make an appearance in today's report from Hush Blackwell. You closed this insanely idiotic deal without inviting public bids with a man who bamboozled the university out of several $1 million in a 2006 contract, despite the fact that KPMG, the outside firm that you hired for their advice, had advised that you invite public bids. Yet today, you will pretend to listen to the report that Hush Blackwell has prepared, another outside firm that you hired for their advice. All of this indicates that you not only love paying exorbitant amounts of money for the university to hire outside consultants to whom you ultimately won't listen, but that the same will happen again today. I could share with you my own experiences with Title IX at LSU and the impact that it's had on me, or I could tell you how I think LSU can improve in that department. However, throughout this saga, you have done absolutely nothing to inspire any confidence in your ability to listen to Hush Blackwell and successfully manage this crisis. So instead, I'm here to remind you that regardless of whatever you hear today and whoever is blamed, you are ultimately responsible for this mess. Whether it's because you don't care or you're just bad at doing your job, you are the guilty party here. I genuinely hope that I have effectively insulted at least a few of you right now, because that insignificant and fleeting feeling that you're experiencing in this particular moment is absolutely nothing in comparison to the persistent and often debilitating fear that survivors at LSU suffer on a daily basis as a direct result of your deliberate indifference to abuse on this campus. That is all.
Thank you for being here today. Today we will begin with a report on the Title IX allegations. Mr. Scott Schneider will present the findings. I do ask that board members please withhold their questions until the completion of his report. So at this time, oh, I'm sorry. I'll call on President Galligan, please introduce.
Thanks. Good morning. As you know, in response to the allegations that LSU mishandled cases of sexual and domestic violence dating back a number of years, we retained Hush Blackwell, a firm renowned for their expertise in this area, to take a deep and critical look at our approach to these cases, as well as our overall reporting and support practices. Today really is a pivotal day for LSU. We find ourselves at the crossroads of a review process that has revealed a sad and unfortunate chapter of our university's history. But this review will also provide a way forward into the future, a future in which history doesn't repeat itself and lasting changes are made to ensure that LSU is a safer, more protective, and welcoming community for everyone, and a place where reports of domestic and sexual violence are handled with the highest professional standards and in a sensitive and compassionate manner. Scott Schneider of Hush Blackwell is with us today by Zoom. He will present the report of his firm has completed over the past 3 months, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to him in a minute. But before I do, I want to offer my sincere apology to the survivors of domestic and sexual violence on our campus. I'm extremely thankful for those who have bravely come forward to share their experiences with us. Everyone in our LSU family owes a deep debt of gratitude because it is through your courage and strength that future students will not go through the same challenges. I promise you, we will use the lessons learned from your experiences to make significant improvements, both on our campus and in our broader campus community. I'm also very grateful to the many students who contacted Husch Blackwell during their investigation to meet with them and share their thoughts, as well as the student organization representatives and employees who participated in interviews with the firm. All of your input and feedback is extremely valuable, and we greatly appreciate it. I also want to thank Mr. Schneider and his colleague, Paige Duggins-Clay, who was also with us by Zoom, for their thorough, candid, and frankly painful assessment of LSU's Title IX reporting history. The important job they were asked to do was not easy, and it was made even more difficult by the fact that in some cases, years have passed, and many, many key individuals have moved on from LSU. After hundreds of interviews and countless hours of research and investigation, what Husch Blackwell has delivered today is exactly what we need: a brutally honest, objective, and transparent evaluation of our culture. What should be among a university's most prized assets, its culture, has at times been our biggest liability. We've been forced to take a hard look in the mirror, and to be perfectly clear, we don't like what we see. Perhaps most troubling of all about the report's findings is the knowledge that, whether through our actions or inactions, our institutions betrayed the very people it was entrusted to protect. Our students look to us to keep them safe, and if that's not possible, to support them in their times of need. It has become abundantly clear we haven't always fully lived up to our commitment. In some cases, we may have kept our promises, but in others, we have failed miserably, and that is simply not acceptable. When it comes to something as serious and as fundamentally important as this, one failure is too many, and we have many more than one. But out of institutional betrayal, hopefully can come institutional courage. Today and going forward, I promise to face the truth and do what is morally right in every instance, despite the pain or the short-term cost. We pledge to protect and care for those who depend on us. While the content of the report is not positive, I am positive about one thing. We are committed to bringing about real concerted change that will make us a better, safer university in the future. We owe it to the brave survivors who told us about their experiences. We owe it to our past, current, and future students. And we owe it to anyone who has ever put their trust in LSU. Today, we draw a line from which we can measure our progress going forward. With that, I'll turn it over to Scott Schneider of Husch Blackwell. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will discuss the report which we provided to you now. Before I do that, I want to thank my colleague, Paige Duggins-Clay, my colleague, Elizabeth Samples, my colleague, David Higgins, who have put in an enormous amount of work here, and I cannot even begin to tell you how much I appreciate everything that they've done to help with this project. I also want to say thank you to you, Mr. President, to the General Counsel, to Linda Davis in the General Counsel's office for helping us in doing this review. Any information that we've asked for in this review, you all have provided to us to the extent you could find it. We did a quick look to try to see how much information we gathered, and we had, I think it was over 20,000 pages of documents, 4.25 gigabytes of data. We've conducted witness interviews. We've had 27 community meetings over the course of the last 2 months, and I'm tired, but I'm at the same time very grateful for the opportunity to do this work with you all. As you alluded to, when we started this project, I was pretty clear with you that whatever I saw was what I was going to say, and nobody tells me what to do or what to say, but I would give you an honest account of what happened here and our thoughts about what happened here, and that's what I've done. What we have done as a team in our report, which we have provided to you and gone into some considerable detail about. If there are any questions about that report, I'm happy to answer any questions. I want to make a big picture point right at the very beginning. And I've worked in this space for a long time, and I've met with a lot of survivors of sexual abuse and have represented survivors of sexual abuse. And it is hard work. Some big picture points. When we think of the incidence rate of sexual violence, people can quibble about the statistics, but pretty consistently what we see is 1 in 4 college-age female students are victims of some sort of sexual assault or sexual misconduct while they're undergraduate students. LSU is certainly no exception to that. One of the other big picture points that I want to make is for the vast majority of victims of sex assault, of rape, dating violence, domestic violence, they won't make a report. They won't come forward. That has gotten better over time. We've gotten much better than we were 30 years ago. But the statistics are really clear that what is being reported is a fraction of what is actually happening on a college campus community. And so when we do get reports of sex assault, when we do get reports of dating violence, it is absolutely imperative that those reports go to the correct people within a university, number one, and that they are handled with the exceptional care that is necessary to respond to something that traumatic. And by the way, that also goes both ways here. I mean, we need to also exercise care to make sure that those accused of serious misconduct are afforded full due process protections and all that. This is very, very difficult work that requires highly skilled people, emotionally intelligent people, people who are up to speed on the neurobiology of trauma. And you need to have a lot of them. They need to be adequately staffed to do this work well. And when we get a report and we don't handle it well, what we do is exacerbate the trauma of the situation. As I think you just said a moment ago, President Galligan, it is an act of institutional betrayal. And on top of that, what it does is it undergirds, it reinforces all of the reasons why victims don't come forward in the first place. So I wanted to start there. This is what we're dealing with, an enormous public health problem, an enormous moral problem that has been horribly underreported for decades. And it's just absolutely critical that in the statistically unlikely event that someone comes forward with a report, that we handle that report with care. We put in the report that we submitted to you, we've been really clear with the university about our findings in this case. What I will say is from a historical perspective, LSU has been very slow to develop policies and infrastructure and personnel that was really required and highlighted starting in 2011 with the 2011 Dear Colleague letter. LSU, based on our review, didn't have a designated Title IX coordinator until 2014. The person that was put in that position was in the Office of General Counsel, was a Deputy General Counsel. We feel as if that sort of arrangement is rife with conflicts, or at least the potential for conflict of interest, and it's one of the issues we highlight in our report that absolutely needs to be changed. We are very critical throughout this report of the Title IX office, and I will just be honest with you. I've struggled with whether or not that criticism has been fair, because from the beginning, when the university designated a Title IX coordinator, a full-time, and I put that in quotes, Title IX coordinator, in 2016, that person was Jenny Stewart. At the time, in addition to being the Title IX coordinator for the A&M campus, she was the Title IX coordinator for the entire system. She also became the Clery Act coordinator for the A&M campus, the Clery Act coordinator for the entire system. She also had Section 504 ADA responsibilities. It's an enormous burden, and I will be blunt. The only person that may be able to manage that sort of workload is my colleague, Paige Duggins-Clay, but that is just not a model that's going to work in an institution as vast and complicated as LSU. When in 2016, you will see this in our report, Jenny Stewart advocated for more resources. The leadership of the university responded in a lackluster fashion. It wasn't they waited about 18 months to provide a lead investigator, one lead investigator, who was tasked with investigating cases both on the Baton Rouge campus, but throughout the university system. So I just want to be clear, up until today, the university's Title IX office has never been staffed appropriately, and we make that clear, I think, throughout the course of the report. In addition, as we mentioned in the report, reporting to the Title IX coordinator is super important for a variety of reasons, some obvious, some maybe not so obvious. But at the end of the day, if we don't get reports into the Title IX office, the Title IX office cannot connect dots throughout the university, which may warrant targeted intervention, a whole number of potential interventions to protect the safety of the campus community. For years, though, LSU's policies around mandatory reporting have been unclear, and we note that throughout the report. I will also say we're not the first people to note that and flag this issue to the leadership of the university. It has been repeatedly addressed to the leadership of the university, and seemingly nothing has been done to remedy it up until this point. In addition, LSU doesn't have a monopoly, by the way, on unclear or ambiguous policies written by lawyers that are very difficult for normal human beings to read. This is a highly regulated area, so that it goes with the territory. But typically, what you will see at other institutions is training which helps clarify the ambiguities. As we mentioned in our report, the training really exacerbated some of the ambiguities and confusion, and you'll see that in the report. To Caroline's point, and first I want to say thank you to her for taking the time to meet with us, and thank you to all the survivors of abuse for taking the time to meet with us. It is personally, I will just say, this work takes an emotional toll. This one has done that, and I want to express my gratitude for her participation. But something she said a moment ago really struck with me, which is these issues have not only been flagged by outside consultants, they've been flagged repeatedly by members of the university community. And we discussed that in the report as well. And so big picture, I don't think the university was in a position for a variety of reasons to successfully handle a case, and let me back up a second. Dating violence cases, if you've ever worked on them, are some of the most complicated cases. And we talk about the science behind that briefly in our report, but they are exceptionally complicated cases that really require an institution to be firing on all cylinders in their Title IX program. And when the one case that has been received considerable media attention was brought to the attention of the university, when it was reported correctly to the Title IX office, the university was not in a position to handle that case the way in which it needed to handle that case. And we outline in our report in a very clear fashion the steps and missteps that we think the university took in handling that case. There are other cases we go into detail about in the report. And I think those issues that we flag in the report speak for themselves. I'll add a couple of other big picture thoughts. In addition to being inadequately staffed really from the beginning here, the university utilized a process which in my mind was, and I haven't found an analog elsewhere, which was enormously complicated. There was a Title IX investigation that would be done that would lead to a conclusion. That conclusion could be appealed to the Title IX coordinator. Then it could be appealed to student advocacy and accountability. If you weren't happy, by the way, on all of these steps, survivors of assault, dating violence are being interviewed maybe 2, 3, 4 times, depending on whether or not they've already done an interview with a police department. After student advocacy and accountability, there would be a finding. Those findings could be appealed to a hearing panel where you would get another opportunity to do this all over again. If somebody was unhappy with that result, they could appeal to a dean. If they were unhappy with that result, they could appeal to the president of the university. For an institution that was staffed to the nines around Title IX, this would have been a very complicated process to successfully navigate. We weren't. And I think one survivor described this, and we put this in the report. It felt as if this system, this process, was designed to put victims in the position where they felt like they were forced to eventually just give up because they were worn down by the process. I want to speak to a couple of discrete issues that I know have gotten a lot of media attention. And like I said, we do detailed discussions of some of the higher profile cases. We also, by the way, did a representative sample file review of cases that the university provided us. So one of the issues we were asked to opine on is, are athletes being treated differently, more favorably in the Title IX process than non-athletic students? And the answer is a bit complicated, and I'd like to just provide a little bit of nuance there. In some ways, and this isn't a design feature, athletes are beneficiaries of being very powerful on campus. And they're beneficiaries in a couple of ways. Number one, that people who are victimized by high-profile student athletes, if there were already incentives not to come forward, they're probably heightened when someone is a high-profile student athlete, especially at a university that cherishes its athletics programs, and in a community that cherishes its athletics program. So number one, the data is pretty clear, not just at LSU, but nationally, that people don't feel comfortable coming forward reporting for a variety of reasons. And those reasons are likely heightened when someone is a prominent student athlete on campus. Number two, we've seen this anecdotally in our reports, that even when someone comes forward with a report against a student athlete, and even when they're provided with support by the university, and I will make a note of coming back to that point in a second, that they are understandably reluctant to participate in the university's Title IX process because they fear community backlash, judgment, being run out of school, all of these sorts of things. So in that sense, athletes have some benefits. They're certainly not formalized in the process. I will say, in going through all of the files that we have gone through over the last 3 months, the errors that we see in the athletics cases, we see them popping up in non-athlete cases as well. So to answer the question, are athletes being treated differently in our process? The answer to that question is no. The mistakes that we talk about over the course of the report, if you pull up a file involving a non-student athlete, you'll see the same mistakes made again. I do want to say something positive at this point, and I will take the invitation Caroline provided me here. Unanimously, the view of the university community was that the university's Lighthouse program, and Susan Boreas, and even outside of the community, our friends at STAR, Morgan Lamondre, are doing remarkable work in this space. And I will say, in terms of providing support to survivors of sex assault and dating violence, that is something not to be taken for granted, because there are communities around the country universities around the country where you don't have that. And it's important. I can't understate the importance of having emotionally intelligent, trauma-informed people who can provide support to victims of sexual violence and dating violence. And you all have that, and that is a really positive thing. We've made some recommendations in our report about how we think we can better utilize those amazing resources. And we hope you decide to accept those recommendations, and we suspect you will, President Galligan, based on our conversations earlier. I also just want to make a quick mention of something. I had a dear friend miscondicted who was a Title IX coordinator at an enormously big institution and mishandled a very difficult case. I found out a week ago that she had committed suicide. Didn't know I was going to bring this up today. But what Caroline said is so true. This work, whether it's providing support services to victims, accused, or processing these very difficult cases, takes an emotional toll on everybody who walks in these roles and fills these roles. And so in addition to appropriately staffing the Title IX office so that we can handle successfully these cases and respectfully these cases, we need to staff these offices appropriately so that the people who are doing this work aren't burnt out, that the ending isn't tragic, and that we can maintain and attract high quality people to these positions. As I said at the very beginning, our report is pretty comprehensive. So, I think it's 150 pages. I'm so grateful for all the work of my colleagues to help with this. I'm sorry I've talked so much. It doesn't pull any punches. I am exceptionally grateful that President Galligan, all he wanted was for me and our team to provide a candid assessment of where the university stood, and that's what we have done. We've also made a series of recommendations to the university that hopefully take a really terrible situation and use it as a moment to do something positive, to fundamentally change the way in which students at LSU are these cases involving dating violence and sex assault, that we use this opportunity to fundamentally change the way in which the university handles these exceptionally complicated cases. I will make a couple of I feel like I want to say something, a couple of positive notes. I did mention Susan Bareas, the Lighthouse program. I will also say in our file reviews, we think, and you will see this in the report, that over the last year to 18 months, that some improvements have been made. And you will see that in the report. We also think there have been some modest improvements in the athletics department under Scott Woodward. At a minimum, now people in athletics know who Jenny Stewart is, the Title IX coordinator. So we think, you've made some improvements, and we hope we've made recommendations that if you accept, will keep you on that trajectory and put the institution in a position to be successful in this space, and more importantly, handle the concerns and needs of people who are impacted by sex-based violence appropriately. And I will say I have a special interest in this one. This isn't like the normal project for me. We need to get it right. I have a daughter, she goes to LSU, but even if I didn't, we've talked to enough survivors of assault that we need to get this right. So happy to answer any questions anyone has. I'm also happy to discuss any of the recommendations we've made.
Scott, I'd like to make some additional comments, and then we can take questions if that's okay with you and Paige. So
yes,
I want to thank you, and I want to thank Paige and your whole team, and I want to assure you and Ms. Schroeder and our entire community that we are going to take this report to heart. You have made, I know people have probably not had a chance to read the report yet, but beginning on page 137 of the report, you make 18 recommendations, and it is my intention to accept and act on every one of those 18 recommendations. And knowing that actions do speak louder than words, I'd like to touch on a number of steps that we're already taking or have pledged to take to begin to chart LSU on the path forward. So first and foremost, as you've noted, all domestic and sexual violence reporting requirements will be resoundingly clarified, and we will continue to communicate loudly, clearly, and consistently that any report of domestic or sexual violence must be directed to the Title IX office. There will be no extenuating circumstances other than for those few who hold confidential reporting roles. From this point forward, failure to report will result in disciplinary action. Second, today we are announcing a new Office of Civil Rights and Title IX, a centralized, visible, on-campus office that will house Title IX as well as Title VII, ADA, accessibility, and other related functions. I'm pleased to say that my friend, Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, Jane Cassidy, has agreed to lead this office on an interim basis as we build the infrastructure, launch new programs, and undertake a national search for a permanent leader. She's one of our most respected faculty members on campus, a fabulous administrator, intelligent, compassionate, and incredibly organized. So Jane, thank you very much. Third, To address the chronic understaffing of our Title IX and affiliated functions, we will be hiring several new staff, including a case manager, administrative support, and additional investigators. We will also designate a deputy Title IX coordinator for support and resources. This will help to improve our record keeping, increase the speed with which we complete the entire process, assure consistency, and increase the sensitivity of the entire process. Fourth, we have contracted with Sexual Trauma and Response, otherwise known as STAR, to evaluate our current training efforts and to implement new, more tailored and effective training and educational courses, including some specifically focused on dating violence. LSU Athletics has also contracted with STAR to secure additional individualized target training for their department. We're also finalizing a memorandum of understanding with the LSU Police Department to ensure that they promptly notify the Title IX coordinator of any incidents of sexual misconduct. We will also explore alternative resolution options and restorative justice for sex discrimination cases as you recommended. We will examine the penalties in domestic and sexual violence cases for faculty, staff, and students and adjust them appropriately. And we're in the process of building a centralized website to increase access to resources and services that are available to the LSU community, as well as to make clearer and more intuitive the process of reporting or seeking help. Our action plan can be seen at LSU EDU Title IX report. Before I close, I'd like to address the issue of disciplinary action for individuals who have violated policies, regardless of when it may have occurred. I recognize that institutional policies have not been clear. Employees have been overburdened and lacking in appropriate resources, and people have generally tried their best under exceptionally difficult circumstances. But the fact remains, we as an institution failed to live up to our commitments. We let some of those who were depending on us down. It is clear our institution as a whole deserves blame. This is an example of serious institutional failure. But people also made mistakes we cannot ignore. That cannot and must not go unaddressed. With the information contained in the report, we're in a better position to assess all of the facts and undertake a more targeted review of individual actions. Thus, we are imposing a 30-day suspension without pay for Virg Osbury, during which time Mr. Osbury shall undergo required domestic and sexual violence training. We're also imposing a 21-day suspension without pay for Miriam Seeger, who will also undergo required domestic and sexual violence training. In closing, let me be clear. Change will happen. I want to promise the LSU community that our eyes are open, and it has strengthened our resolve to do what it takes to make LSU a safer and more welcoming place for everyone. Now we'll take questions.
Thank you, President Galligan. Scott and Paige, we thank you both. You worked extremely hard, gave us a very thorough report. We are very appreciative of your hard work. I also want to thank the LSU folks that worked with you, including President Galligan and General Counsel DeQueer and his team for what I know was their excellent cooperation and work. And not to be redundant, but just simply to state what this board believes and this board pledges to accomplish is we will get this right. And that's our commitment. So at this time, I'll take questions or comments from board members for Scott and Paige. Questions, anyone? Questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Randy Morris here. President, in that plan will also be educational information for our staff and employees on who to report to and how to report it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna make clear what the reporting lines are. I've said when I came back to LSU in 2016, it's always been clear to me what my responsibility was to report. But what I have learned through this investigation is that while I may have been clear as a dean of the law center, what we've said to our community has not been clear at all. And as Scott indicated, our training, we use additional language, we use different language that doesn't clarify, it obfuscates. And we will definitely clarify that language and make it clear and consistently use the same language to say, here's who you report to and when. So yes, sir. And STAR's audit of our training and working with us, and we're really looking forward to continuing and building on our relationship with STAR, will be faculty, staff, and student training.
Any other questions or comments from anyone?
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
As Scott pointed out, and I want to add, Baton Rouge and LSU is certainly very fortunate to have the services of STAR. And I want to commend that organization for the work they do, because it has been pointed out by Ms. Schroeder, by this report, the interviews and the work, that even in the best of intentions, egregious mistakes have been made. But when we have another organization from without that is working with us daily, it helps us to be more accountable and is another level of accountability and training that our entire university can get. And I pray for our other peer universities that they can acquire such services. And I am very appreciative for the work and for our leadership that reaches out, and that those folks came in to help us uncover all these horrific details in this report. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Werner. Mr. Williams.
Yes, a comment and then a question. First, I want to thank Interim President Galligan, Chairman Dampf, Mr. Schneider and his law firm, Ms. Duggins Clay, for this powerful, impactful work. As the father of 2 daughters, the work today will literally save lives, literally and emotionally and psychologically. And so I can't thank everyone involved enough for finally bringing these dreaded practices to light in a meaningful, comprehensive, unavoidable way that we can take action on. So thank you all very, very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
My question is, I know we've mentioned in the report, very well done report, and Mr. President, you mentioned discipline for 2 university employees. I've read the report. I guess I'd like maybe Scott or Paige, one of you, to speak to, are these the only 2 culpable parties responsible here? Are we limited in what we can do because of circumstances? I just want to get a better impression from you all about the responsible parties here.
Yeah, no, happy to, thanks, James. Happy to weigh in. Look, throughout the report, we point out pretty clearly, I think, where mistakes were made and when people have made mistakes. It's not, it's up to the university. Look, the practice of lawyers telling the university who they should or shouldn't fire or discipline is not a good practice. I think it would be advisable for the university to take the report, look at other errors that were committed, and decide what, if any, appropriate disciplinary action is warranted. I will be blunt and maybe too direct. You know, we point out a number of mistakes the Title IX office has made in handling cases. I don't know, I'm a big believer in trying to be fair with folks. And as I said at the beginning, I don't know if anybody, given the vast caseload and the lack of resources, could have been successful. I do think the university, and it sounds like President Galligan is going in this direction, needs to supervise that office, needs someone that the university community has confidence in to supervise that office and decide whether or not this was a product of not being appropriately staffed or there are other issues. But Mr. Williams, you know, throughout the report, we identify mistakes. The university has that. The only thing we would ask for is that those people who have been accused of making mistakes be treated fairly, and I know you all will, and that they be treated pursuant to and in accordance with university policies and processes.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to,
Go ahead.
I'd like to just comment. The class, the training that I guess all the faculty and I know the board has to go through that at the end of the year. And I got to tell you, I agree that it is extremely confusing on who to report to, who not to report to, who qualifies as this person. That needs to be simplified so bad. And I'm glad, we're going to move to do that. But everybody at every level, any professor, any teacher ought to know the head of the Title IX office with their phone number to report that to any victim. I mean, it should not be this difficult. And I'm, so happy we're moving in that direction. And we ought to strive to, lead the nation in Title IX issues. Because certainly it's been very bad, but very confusing.
I appreciate your comment. I think it's spot on, Mr. Blossom.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other comments?
Yes, I had some questions.
Yes, sir.
So obviously it's been well documented in the report, and then as told before that LSU has failed its students in the past. We failed the Title IX office. We failed to train our employees in the best way possible. And we failed to listen to many of the warning signs that have been presented to administrators that are no longer here. I'd like to say for the record, however, I do have faith in President Galligan. Having worked with him, I think that his heart is pure on this issue and he's just, and he will put us on a path that will be the correct path possible. Now, with that being said, Mr. Schneider, you talked a lot about the systems being unclear, correct? And one of the things I have is it true that from 2016 to 2018, all of the athletics department staff were required to sign a coach and staff acknowledgement form, which provided I understand I have a responsibility to inform an uninvolved member of the athletics department or a university administrator or otherwise utilize available avenues of reporting so prompt action may be taken to stop misconduct and prevent future occurrences?
Yes, sir. I mean, that's in, we do about, I think, 5 or 6 pages where we talk about the edicts that are specific to athletics. But I think that stone is a fair summary of at least one of them.
So would you say that statement in that direction is unclear and not easy to understand?
Well, yeah, I'll rephrase it a little bit. I don't know how to put this any other way. When I go and do training, for instance, for athletic employees, it's around Title IX. The training is really short and it's really sweet. It is, when you hear about these things, get out of the way and report them to the Title IX coordinator. What I would have loved to have seen in the policies, the edicts, the training to the athletics employees staff is something that clear that says, when you become aware of it, report it on to the Title IX coordinator. And that's nowhere to be found.
And so an uninvolved member of the athletics department or university administration needs to be clarified to say Title IX coordinator. Simple as that. Okay. So that's a simple fix that I believe that we'll be able to make. And then on the fact of punishment, I know that through reading the report and looking through it, one of the things that was very evident, was clear, and I think that, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Schneider, was said in the report is that there were many warning signs, which is documented, and that I think there was a sentiment, I don't know if it was from you or if it was someone that you interviewed, that if LSU would have correctly disciplined the first case of this, and they would have correctly adjudicated the process, that it would have set the tone moving forward. Is that correct? Was that from y'all or was that from someone else?
No, I'm happy to speak to that. when you, and I'm going, Stone, I'm probably going to give you a less pithy answer than you wanted, but I want to give you some substance. The research is really clear that in terms of culture, what we hold leaders to and what leaders do in departments sets the tone for what's tolerated within a department. And you'll see when leaders engage in acts of sex discrimination or other bad, unethical acts, whatever the case may be, that number one is problematic. When they are reported for doing that and the report isn't handled appropriately and they're not disciplined appropriately, that creates a whole set of additional problems, both in terms of sending the message out that this may be acceptable behavior, but also sending out a message that arguably discourages people from coming forward with reports. And so that's a long answer to your question, but no, the culture within any department about what we tolerate and what the leader of a department tolerates and does. And then from an institutional perspective, when we find out about these things, how we handle those things is absolutely mission critical.
And I'm glad that you say that, because as leaders, both on the board and then both institutional leaders through LSU, there is, and with any leadership position, there's a lot of perks that are involved with that leadership position because of the demand that there is. And the tone, and I think that you said it very well, the tone is set at the top. And I think that we need to set a strong tone moving forward. And I know in the report that there was, for instance, other individuals in the athletic department removed for failing to report specific things. And I guess I'm going to go to President Galligan on this one. I'm by no means claim to have all the answers. However, I do have to speak on behalf of the students, and I'm afraid some of the students will view some of the punishments made today as a repeat, as LSU repeating history for not holding individuals properly accountable. Now, again, it's a very difficult situation, and I don't have all the answers, and I don't know when to tell you what to do. But I would be remiss if I did not say that in the board meeting today.
Mr. Cox, let me speak to that for just a minute, and President Galligan may want to as well. What we do in terms of these individual cases will not make anybody happy or feel like it was appropriate. That's the nature of it. And certainly there'll be students and community members that don't feel like it was appropriate. And there may be folks that think it was too harsh. And so that's the nature. But let me remind everybody that the problem is systemic. We had an absolute failure of resource allocation. And you know, you put your treasure where your heart is. We didn't do it right. We didn't allocate resources properly. And coupled with that, and a part of that was a failure of leadership, and it's all over this report. And that was sort of to Mr. Williams' point a moment ago. We clearly had a failure of leadership and a failure of resources. That creates an opportunity and almost mandates failure, and we failed. And so then it becomes very difficult to the level of blame or punishment at an individual person that's down the line, because the system hasn't been set up well, communication hasn't been good, education hasn't been good, and the proper tone of leadership hasn't been good. And so it's more than focusing on those individuals, and maybe that's too generic. Scott, and you may want to comment on that, or President Galligan may.
I'll chip in briefly. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think the moral obligation I always feel on these things, and first of all, this is a call for the leadership of the university to make, but in all of these things, I feel this heavy weight of wanting to be fair to everyone. You know, in the report, we briefly address this. I think the context that you just gave is important in assessing, are we being fair? Is the institution being fair? And I'll get out of the way of the president at this point.
Yeah, no, I think you said it very well, and I think, Stone, you've raised the question effectively and appropriately. We don't have guidelines anywhere as to what appropriate discipline is in these cases. That's a problem. And one of the things that is at the heart of fairness is notice, and there is no notice. There will be in the future. In making the recommendations and taking the actions we took, we realized, as Chair Danforth said, that people will be unhappy either way. I simply tried to be as fair as I possibly could. And again, I'm going to read from the report because I know everybody hasn't had the chance. But as I literally labored over this issue, finally I was influenced heavily by page 137, which is after Hush Blackwell says it'll be up to the university to make decisions about discipline. They write, throughout this report, we have stressed that in many ways, the employees tasked with these important responsibilities were not served well by the leadership of the university. Institutional policies were unclear. Edicts were issued by supervisors that conflicted with policies. Employees were overburdened with vast institutional roles and not provided with appropriate resources. Calls for additional resources went unheeded. Concerns were not responded to, etc. As part of this review, we have interviewed several employees who acknowledged making mistakes and emotionally shared that they were trying their absolute best under exceptionally difficult circumstances. So I do not claim to have Solomonic wisdom. I just tried to be as fair as I could under the circumstances.
No, absolutely. I believe you 100% in that. And again, just for the record, I'm not a fan of cancel culture. As a Christian, I believe that, individuals are flawed and that we have the chance to grow and that there's grace for our mistakes. But those were some concerns that I felt needed to be addressed that I think the students are going to cry out for.
Mr. Dow.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a comment.
Yes, sir, Mr. Morris.
You mentioned in the report, it says lack of leadership. Some of that leadership is no longer with LSU, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I think those people, I think it's in the report, that they take some blame for this also. Now, they're not our employees anymore, so we can't discipline them, but they are responsible for some of the action that took place, and that needs to be duly noted. We're disciplined some of the people that are still our employees, but those people who are not our employees have some sense of responsibility there also.
And I think, Mr. Morris, I think the report makes that pretty darn clear. Yes, sir, Mr. Brown.
Wayne Brown. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Hudson Blackwell if it would be appropriate and within their services to follow up in, let's say, 6 months prior to the next fall's start of classes to evaluate how we have responded to your recommendations with staffing and then also with communications and resources. Would that be appropriate? And if so, like to have, suggest we do that and have the report back to our board.
Wait, I think we're making steps to do that internally. Yes, that will be done.
Yeah.
Robert, I have a question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Armentor.
Pose this to Scott, please. Scott, I'm certain that the university and all of us as leaders will do everything we possibly can to learn and implement all 18 of your recommendations. But I would personally appreciate it if you would let us know the 3 or 4 that are most important for our case, because perhaps LSU was totally lacking in that area, or maybe because the remedy is so important in its depth of importance.
Yeah. No, happy to do it now. The most important recommendation, and everything else is almost secondary, is that you need appropriate staffing of this office, and that's recommendation number one. So you're going to have to commit resources to bringing in talented, skilled people to help do this work. I think number two for me is the reporting line to the general counsel needs to change and needs to change immediately. And from what President Galligan has already said, it sounds like we're in agreement on that as well. I think the third one I'll leave with that I think is important, and again, we make all of these recommendations, but you'll see in the report, we're not the first people to make recommendations to you. And I think to Caroline's point, and even to Stone's point, at the end of the day, if this report is given to you, and I got no indication from any meeting I've had with President Galligan that this is a possibility, but if this report is given to you and we don't implement these recommendations, the same ills that we discussed throughout the report will just continue to repeat themselves. So I think the last piece is that there be public accountability on a website, whatever the case may be, that says, these are the recommendations. This is the timeline to address these recommendations. And this is when, and when we've done them, we mark that. But I think there needs to be, a public accountability to make sure that the recommendations made in the report, to the extent you all accept them, that you all are making steady progress to make that happen.
Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
And Scott, we will do exactly that.
Any further questions, comments? Anyone? I don't want to leave anybody out. At this time, unless there is an objection, the board will recess until 12:45. With no objection, we are in recess. There will be a press conference in the Able room at this time. Thank you.
Hey there, friends. Thanks for being with us. I'm Jaron Jordan. We're coming onto the air this afternoon with this special report. LSU Interim President Tom Galligan is just about to take some questions after Hush Blackwell, that independent law firm, has just released their findings into how the university has handled sexual assault and misconduct cases. Let's listen in. And it seems like they're still getting ready there for this news conference there at the podium. Again, they're all coming out of the Board of Supervisors meeting that just wrapped up or just went into recess a few short moments ago in the room adjacent to what you're looking at. Hush Blackwell, that independent law firm, releasing their near 150-page report on how the university has handled sexual assault and misconduct cases. Some of the big takeaways from that report from Scott Schneider, really the overarching point, saying that LSU has been pretty slow in developing policies and infrastructure and personnel to adequately handle these cases. Of course, there have been some pretty high-profile cases recently that thrust this issue into a really national spotlight, but what we also heard from Scott Schneider there was
that to you with the microphone. That way everybody can hear. And the other thing I'll say is, I know most of you will have 3 to 4, 5, 6, 7 questions. Please be respectful. We'll try to ask 1 or 2, and then we'll move on to somebody else. We will get back to you. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can, okay? Scott, can you hear me?
I can now, yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, with that, I'll turn it over to LSU Interim President Tom Galligan.
Good morning and welcome to LSU. As I said in my comments to the board, today is a pivotal day for LSU. On one hand, we must reckon with the harsh reality of our past. On the other, we have a duty to learn from the mistakes and put LSU on a path of lasting change. Change that will ensure our campus community is safe, supportive, and welcoming for everyone. I want to again offer a sincere apology to the survivors of domestic and sexual violence on our campus. We thank them for bravely coming forward. While their stories have been painful for us to hear, nothing comes close to the pain each of them has endured. Through their courage and strength will come progress. It's time for LSU to show that same level of courage. Courage to face the truth and do what is morally right. The courage to own past mistakes and prevent them from happening again. Behind me are the leaders of LSU, including board members, senior administrators, and student leaders, who stand with me today in a commitment to do better. The findings of the Hush Blackwell report present us with a roadmap for doing what is right. Together, we pledge to follow that roadmap, and on behalf of all former and current students and employees, we promise to create an LSU that is safe, fair, just, and worthy of the trust placed in us. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you today. Now we'll try to answer any questions you have.
President Galligan, this is Catherine Manuel with LSU Reveille. My first question is, the report spoke to there needing to be a sense of public accountability. Can you clarify what this means, what that may look like in the future for the university?
Yeah, I think public accountability means, one, we have to own up to the mistakes that we have made in the past. We have to apologize for the mistakes that we have made in the past and the damage that we have done. And it also means that as we go forward, and I think in the board meeting right before we broke, Scott Schneider said this very, very well, we have to publicly and transparently hold ourselves accountable. So we have to take the 18 recommendations that Hush Blackwell has made and other things that we are doing. We have to put them, I'll be as simple as this, we've got to put them on a public checklist, and we've got to say, here's what we're going to do, here's when we're going to do it by, and then y'all can look at that checklist and say, okay, they did this, they did this, they did this. Why is this one delayed? So I think it's got to be a public, transparent process. The report is 148 pages long. It's available. You can now read it. So we've got to be more transparent in this work than we have ever been before.
Michael Cobble, WBRZ Channel 2 here in Baton Rouge. This question might be for you and for Scott. With respect to everyone in this room, and not unlike many colleges across the South, the head football coach at a university has enormous power. What steps are you prepared to enact to implement a system of checks and balances and accountability for powerful coaches within your athletic department?
And I think not just within our athletic department, but across our entire campus. And Scott Schneider can speak to this as well. I think it may be the 18th recommendation, and the 18th recommendation is this applies to everyone. So we have to be absolutely clear that each and every one of us is subject to the same rules, the same reporting requirements, and the same standards of behavior.
We got one in the back. Good morning. Dion Guillory with NBC 33 Fox 44. These 18 recommendations, and I know you mentioned just how many pages this thing is, 148 pages. It's a lot to go through. But is there a timetable in trying to reach these benchmarks? And if so, what is that? And with the transparency being mentioned several times through this, how are you going to let people know that this is happening?
There isn't a timetable yet, but I will say that creating the Office of Civil Rights in Title IX will happen immediately, and as soon as Jane Cassidy can distribute her current responsibilities to her successors, she will be on the job, and I expect that may be next week. And again, what we will do is we will post the recommendations in a comprehensible fashion. That there are 12 pages in here in a shorter way, and we'll say what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and we will update. Certainly, it may change, like our roadmap to diversity. As we discuss and as we see other things we should do, we'll add those things to the list.
Yes, Abby Rocha with NBC and Fox in Baton Rouge. Part of the investigation entailed that victims were saying that they were having trouble getting their reports, and they were saying that the university was not complying with getting documentation. Will there be changes with that when it, talking about transparency?
One of the recommendations, and I'm going to ask Scott to help me with this one, but one of the recommendations with the detail of it, one of the recommendations is to improve our record keeping. And certainly, I think General Counsel Winston DeQueer Jr., who's with me, would agree. We need to improve our record keeping and the way we track things. Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. The record keeping is a problem we highlighted throughout the report. I'd also say, and what I'd ask you to do is kind of put yourself in the position of a 18, 19-year-old student who's been sexually assaulted and is now in this process. it's a difficult process under any set of circumstances, but one of the things that is critical in making a student feel supported in that process is that they're getting something in the way of regular communication from the Title IX office. And you just don't, at this point, LSU did not have the staffing to do that. So one of the recommendations we've made as well is, and this is what peers around the country do, they need somebody who can basically be a case manager. And in addition to, just making sure the investigation is going well, is touching base with them to tell them what the status is, checking on them, things like that. So I think those two, the record keeping needs to be fixed, but you also need personnel who can have that regular communication with students.
Chris Nakamoto with WBRZ TV. The Les Miles report that was released yesterday basically said that we do not believe under the existing law and the terms of his contract that there was cause to terminate his contract because student number 2 was adamant about her identity not being revealed. So does this mean essentially that a complaint can't be verified without unmasking a victim?
Scott?
Yeah, so I'm going to be careful, but I won't be careful. I'm not a big fan of the investigation report. I do think there are ways in a situation like that that we could allow a victim who is concerned about
Yep. Let's see if we can't restore the connection.
Recording in progress.
Is he back?
Sorry.
Sorry, Scott, we lost connection, but.
Okay, Scott, we lost you at, you thought there might be ways.
Yeah, there are definitely ways in a situation, and I will say they are complicated now with the Trump Title IX regulations, but there are steps that you could do to do a full-blown investigation while at the same time providing for confidentiality. Now, I will say, look, if you end up, a coach is unhappy that they end up getting disciplined, it is a possibility, and I actually defend lawsuits like this, that the coach could sue the school and sue the young woman and for defamation. And in that sense, it might not be confidential, but in the investigation process, no, we think there are steps that you could take to maintain that student's confidentiality.
Hey, I also have a question about the internal investigation that came out yesterday. So part of it was, and I actually want to direct it to the athletic director. Part of what was mentioned was that Coach Miles wanted student workers who were women who were young, fit, and blonde, and it was never really addressed whether LSU complied with that request, whether you did hire people who were young, fit, and blonde. So I want to know if there are any physical characteristics that cause people to get hired that work in the athletic department, student workers.
I can't answer to Coach Miles because I wasn't here, but the answer is no. We currently do not do that.
Okay. And the other question related to that is, one of the reasons the Les Miles investigative report, in my opinion, didn't come out sooner is because LSU took great pains to make sure it was outside of the public record in some ways. The law firm sent the report to Coach Miles' lawyer, and it's pretty well detailed how that was kept, out of the public record. Are you aware of that happening in other cases at the university, and is that something that's going to happen going forward?
I'm not aware of that happening in any other cases. And I will say that I learned of that investigation during this process. I would say maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago was the first time I learned about it. No, I do not think we will do that going forward.
So that's not standard practice?
Not to me, it's not standard practice.
Okay.
Austin Kemker, WAFB. The two members of leadership that were named and disciplined, are those the only two that are still in active leadership at the university that are being disciplined, or will there be future discipline that's considered for other members who played a role in what happened?
We'll consider the whole report. We'll go back through and we'll look at the whole report, and we'll make decisions accordingly. Those are the decisions that we've made to date based on the report and based on the investigation.
Any idea how long that might take?
I don't think it's going to take very long at all.
Yeah, Ron Higgins, Tiger-Rag. In all these cases with the football players, the alleged rapes and whatever, how does a head football coach not know about this? Is he that insulated where nobody tells him? Because football coaches usually have a pretty good idea what's going on with their football team through their assistant coaches. Is there any explanation about that?
I would think, Scott, can you speak to the investigation on that as to anything you found regarding knowledge?
No, I think we need to be careful here. I don't think there's any, on a lot of these, Coach Ogeron in particular, I think knew of these things. But what you want is, you don't want the coaches involved in these investigations. Yes, they should know about it, but we don't want the athletics department involved in these investigations. What we want is athletics to be out of it entirely and allow the Title IX office to do its investigation. And so, the question about, did the Coach Ogeron, for instance, know about some of these incidents? You'll see in the report, the answer is yes, but those in part were being handled sometimes okay, sometimes really not okay by the Title IX office. But you don't want, one of the lessons from the Baylor situation was, you don't want athletics to be overly involved in these cases for a variety of reasons. The biggest one being, you might be really good at, coaching football. I guarantee you're not going to be good at doing these sorts of investigations. So I wanted to reframe it a little bit. Yes, there definitely he knows, but you don't want them to have an active role in that process.
One more question, if I may. The tennis coaches at the cells, obviously there's plenty of stuff in here where there was conversations between the parent and the cells. Why weren't they disciplined?
I think you should read the report, and the report speaks for itself on that matter, in part on what determinations Hush Blackwell made regarding knowledge and credibility.
A question for Mr. Schneider. This is Glenn Gilbo from USA Today, Louisiana. Did you have a say in the discipline for Verge Osbury and Miriam Seeger? Did you make a recommendation? Do you think that's enough discipline for those two? Doesn't seem like a lot.
What I said in the report is, I think in those two cases, discipline was appropriate, and the call about what the appropriate discipline is going to be left to the leadership of the university. And I will say, from my perspective, I would encourage you to read the whole report, but there's some perspective there. And I think in all cases, I'm not a big fan of offering up people as sacrificial lambs. And I think in each instance, folks need to be treated fairly. And on the Verge Osbury piece, somebody asked me a question sometime this week about he's the most, I don't know Verge Osbury from anybody, but I think in Verge Osbury's case, to be fair, the extenuating factors that we talk about in the report should be considered. Ultimately, it's up to the university to decide what they think is an appropriate discipline.
President Galligan, what was your thoughts on that discipline, and did you make the final decision on that?
Yeah, I did make the final decision on that, and my thoughts were that I had an obligation to be as fair to everyone as I possibly could, and that I tried to be as fair as I possibly could. And if you'll forgive me, I will read again from page 137 of the report. And what page 137 of the report says is, throughout this report, we have stressed that in many ways the employees tasked with these important responsibilities were not served well by the leadership of the university. Institutional policies were unclear. Edicts were issued by supervisors that conflicted with policy. Employees were overburdened with vast institutional roles and not provided with appropriate resources. Calls for additional resources went unheeded. Concerns were not responded to, etc. As part of this review, we have interviewed several employees who acknowledged making mistakes and emotionally shared that they were trying their absolute best under exceptionally difficult circumstances. And I would also point you to footnote 171 on page 74.
Just the discipline aspect that you mentioned at the end in there was rather vague, and I understand the processes that are now in line and the desire to remove athletics from the equation, but it is not in these teams' best interest to report some of these cases. So how will you ensure that those cases or those instances and those investigations start? Is there a framework there? Because it seems, again, it's going to be incumbent upon the victim to start the process.
Yeah, I think as many of these questions, that's a great question. And first and foremost, there has to be training. People have to understand what their responsibilities are. They have to absolutely know, call the Title IX coordinator or file a report. So it has to be clear and people have to be trained. But the most important thing, I think, and this is going to take time, is culture. And the culture has to be, we do not accept domestic and sexual violence at LSU. That is not who we are. I love this institution, and I love it mostly because of its people. And we failed our people in this regard, so we have got to change the culture. And as we go forward, we're going to work with STAR and we're going to work with our own community to make those cultural changes so that, as you say, it's maybe not in the best interest of whatever the organization I'm a part of is to report this, but it's my personal responsibility to report it. And the culture is that if I don't report it, I can't sleep at night. All right? It might be there's going to be discipline and this is going to happen, but I can't sleep at night. So we've got to change the culture.
I have two quick questions, if that's all right. The first, did the athletics department continue the policy of funneling Title IX complaints through Miriam Seeger after Woodward took over as AD in April 2019? I'm not entirely sure who could answer that.
I think, and Scott can help me out, I'm not sure it was overnight, but the athletic department has definitely changed that process. That Miriam Seeger is no longer the person reported to. Now, as you will see in the report, there were several communications to athletics employees that you report to Miriam Seeger. That was wrong. And now we do the right thing. They don't report to Miriam Seeger. Miriam Seeger was placed in a very difficult situation as a result of that. So that's changed. And I don't know, Scott, if it changed immediately, but it's definitely changed. That's not the way it is anymore. But it's also essential, I think, to point out that it isn't just athletics. That there are other instances in the report where, for instance, a dean wrote to the folks in the dean's college, report Title IX issues to me, not to Title IX. No, Title IX.
And my second question, kind of a follow-up to that, is you're speaking about page 137. I briefly looked over it before asking, but I'm just going to ask for clarity. You mentioned that edicts were instituted by supervisors and they conflicted with policy. Was upper administration aware of this, and how did this happen if that conflicted with the Title IX policy in place?
Yeah, I wish I could answer that. Scott Schneider might be able to answer that. And I don't want to sound like I'm passing the buck, but I wasn't aware of it because I was not in this position at that time. I was responsible for the law center. But Scott, I don't know if you can comment on that.
It was one of the, when you do these reviews, some of them are really boring. That was like an eye-opening moment. Like, how in the heck, how does this happen? That the reports are going directly to Miriam Seeger. And I think the thing, and I did mention this briefly, that was just remarkable to me was one of those emails comes out in response to what was going on at Baylor. And as I said before, a lot of lessons to learn from the Baylor case. The biggest one is you can't allow athletics to basically decide what gets forwarded to the Title IX office. It needs to go directly to the Title IX office. So I will say, there were conflicting accounts given to us. There was some discussion that there was a meeting with the former president where he told everybody everything needs to go directly to the Title IX office and that this was in violation of that edict. But I know when we got it, it was one of these moments where I was just a bit beside myself.
Mr. Schneider, did the former athletic director put Miriam Seeger in this bad position? And overall, what was your view on former athletic director Joe Oliva, how he approached and maybe contributed to the culture?
Well, boy, it's such a great question. There's no question with respect to the first one that he was the one that put Miriam Seeger in that position. I mean, the edicts, the emails come from him. I have very mixed feelings. To me, I don't want to overstate the significance, but I don't want to understate the significance of it either. I continue to question had we handled the Les Miles situation a little differently, the impact that would have had on the culture of the athletics program in terms of what we tolerate, number one, and that reporting is valued. And on that score, we were able to find some emails that Mr. Oliva drafted and that I think were absolutely correct, that were recommending that the university decide to let him go. So I think his instincts on that were the correct instincts. I don't know exactly how that we ended up with the decision we ended up, but the edict for Miriam, in essence, to be kind of a choke point for whether the report gets to the Title IX office was his, and I think it's a problematic practice.
I guess for me, do any of the LSU contracts with executives, administrators, coaches have morals clauses in them that would require immediate firing?
Yes. Winston, this is General Counsel.
The contracts do have moral clauses in them, but they allow the university the discretion to determine when discipline should be issued.
Did Les Miles' contract have a morals clause in it? Could you not claw back what we paid out to him?
Yeah, I can't answer to the specifics of Les Miles' contract just because I don't. I've been here a year and I can't say that I've reviewed it recently.
I can't. I have not reviewed Les Miles' contract.
All right, friends, we've been watching and listening to this news conference happening there at LSU's Lodcook Alumni Center. A lot to unpack from this news conference and even the Board of Supervisors meeting that preceded it. Obviously, a lot of details coming from Hush Blackwell, that independent law firm, releasing a 148-page review of how the university has handled sexual assault and misconduct cases. The big takeaway from not only that law firm, but even Tom Galligan there, the interim president at LSU, saying the university has really failed to adequately handle these cases. So what comes next? The big headline out of there, the university is creating a centralized and visible office to handle civil rights and Title IX cases. They're also planning on hiring more staff, case managers, and investigators to take these complaints and allegations seriously, and they're contracting with local resources, sexual trauma and response, to encourage and improve on training and resources. So we also heard from Galligan there say overall the culture needs to change at the university. So how that happens over the next couple of weeks and months and years, that is all to be seen. But a lot coming out of this. We are going to continue to stream this news conference right now on our website, brproud.com, and our free BR Proud app if you're interested in seeing that. We'll have full coverage tonight right here on NBC Local 33 News at 5 and 6.
Aggressive attorneys and all that sort of stuff. She may have had reluctance actively participating given how involved and aggressive perhaps counsel was for Coach Miles. But there are ways you could, certainly before the 2020 regs, to protect confidentiality and anonymity as much as possible.
I think we'll have time for a few more. Michael? My question is actually for Scott Woodward, if I may. Scott, if you could speak to your athletic department's compliance here, and obviously cooperation going forward, your belief that you're going to get it right in the future, and your belief in your 2 employees that were named in this report.
Yeah, it's absolutely imperative, and that's the most important thing that we can take away today, Michael, is that we have to get it right going forward. And as an alum and as an athletic director, I'm embarrassed about what's happened in the past and what we've done not protecting in these situations, and getting it right is important. You know, we want to review the past and accept the past, but the most important thing is for us to get it right going forward. And that's where we are, and I have great confidence in both Miriam and Verge that they will. They've accepted it, and they will understand how we do it, and they're wonderful employees that have helped dozens and dozens of not only student athletes, but general students in this place. They pour in and out of their offices for help all the time, and they're good people, and they were put in untenable situations, and for that, I'm looking forward for them to reflect and to learn and to accept what's happened, and us be better going forward, because we have to be.
I just kind of want to ask a question similar to Stone's question in the meeting. I mean, I know that the athletic department, and I don't know about the rest of the campus, but you all are bringing in an outside contractor to talk to people at least 2 or 3 times a year about how to handle complaints like this. At least one, and you're bringing in speakers, and you're bringing in people to talk about this. So I guess having not read through the whole report, I guess I'm not understanding how it could be so confusing to know if you're having training 2 or 3 times a year outside of what the university is doing, to know when you should mandatory report. Are we not going to have that training anymore in athletics? Because clearly it wasn't very effective. I mean, or maybe it was, and you can explain that to me.
I can at least, I think, begin to explain it, and my explanation, beginning of it, really comes from this report, and it comes from what I have learned over the last 3 months. And one thing is, I really would encourage you to read the report, because, the part of the question about training is read the part of the report about the training, about different language in PM 73, from in emails that are sent to people telling them to whom to report, to training slides that have different statements of the theme, to a basic responsibility to report that it's vague. So I can see all those things would lead to confusion, even if I said report in a meeting, and it's your responsibility. When you go to look it up, when you go to verify it, it is very, very confusing. And I would also say, and this gets back to this culture question, which is the huge question of all. If the culture's not right, if the tone isn't set from the top, then whatever you hear in training can be undermined by what you see going on around you. And those are really the things that we have to change if we're going to have a safer campus and we're going to do our best to eradicate domestic and sexual violence from our campus. So I think there was a lot of confusion, there was inadequate staffing, and there were not clear messages about how important this was.
But should you need training to know if someone says they punched or hit their girlfriend, that maybe something should be done about that? Or if someone you coach comes in and says they've had their ribs broken by their boyfriend? I mean, I don't know. I wonder, I feel like people out in public are going to be like, do you need training to know that that's something that's alarming?
Yeah, I think, again, I would say, I hear what you're saying clearly, but I would also say the messages were not at all consistent, nor was it clear what one's own personal responsibility was within the system. But I appreciate the viewpoint. That's part of what makes this so hard.
One of the questions we had when this investigation was first announced, Scott, you have a connection to LSU, so I guess the big question for us is, how is this truly an independent review when you yourself have a connection to the university?
For the record, my connection to the university is my daughter goes there. I think the report speaks for itself. It's as independent as, there's no question about, from my standpoint, that I answered every question and dealt with every issue. First off, with absolutely no pressure from the university other than to tell the truth, and I did that.
Anybody else have a question? All right, last one we got Abby from WVLA.
Many of the victims that have come forward have faced backlash, emotional distress. Is the university doing anything to make it right with them?
I think first and foremost, we apologize to them, and we're very, very sorry for what they went through and for what they had to go through. And I will continue to express all of our heartfelt apologies to them. As I said, I love LSU, and what I love about it are our people, and we did not adequately support these people, the survivors who have come forward. And I also will say again, I thank them for coming forward. I don't think I can really appreciate how courageous it was, but it's incredibly courageous that they did come forward. And if they hadn't come forward the way they did, we wouldn't be here today. This is a sad day for us in facing up to our past and to what happened. But today is also a day for us, I use the line, we can draw a line and we can measure our progress forward. And the progress we make will be built in large part upon the courage and strength of those survivors who came forward. So I'm both grateful to them, and with all my heart, I apologize to them.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things about that too. meet with them, you realize how exceptionally difficult it was for these students to make reports to begin with. I mean, think of, Darius Geis at the time is probably, if not the most popular person in Louisiana, he's way up there. To have the bravery to come forward with a report just speaks volumes. This won't be maybe popular, but I also need to, I think the press and the story, that they participated in that shone a light on this. The USA Today, for the most part, when you go through what they put in their reporting, and there are a couple of things where I go, I'm not sure I agree, but for the most part, they were pretty spot on. And those journalists, I think, deserve some credit as well.
We got one more from WBRZ.
This is probably an open-ended question, and I think I might know the answer, but is the NCAA involved in any of this? And do you anticipate them becoming involved in any of this?
The NCAA is not involved in this at this point. I do not anticipate them being involved in this. But if they are, we will fully and openly we'll open our books and we will fully cooperate in any investigation that they have.
All right, thank you, everybody.